Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop, Dovetails by Hand, chiseling tips and tricks. This is the weakest skill no matter where I go and teach dovetails. And I'm going to show you what to avoid and how to get perfect dovetails, especially dealing with the chiseling portion. Stay with us. I'm Rob Cosman and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new and you haven't subscribed, please do so. Hit the notification bell so you'll receive alerts when we release a new video. And anytime we use a special tool, we'll always leave a description down below. All right, let's get to work. I teach lots of people how to cut the dovetails. It's numbering in the multiple thousands. And it's interesting that in a one-day class, that sawing skills can get so advanced that the average student can assemble their joint right from the saw. By that I mean they don't have to go in and do any paring. However, the areas that involve chiseling always show as the worst part of the joint. And on something like this, we're talking about this joint line, that joint line, and on this side, this, and that joint line. Now, part of it is chisels that aren't properly prepared. Part of it is chisels that aren't properly sharpened. I'll cover a little bit of that, but mostly I want to focus on the actual technique of using the chisel, assuming that it is good and sharp. I'm going to go through them one at a time. I'm going to give you all the tips and tricks that I know that will make you better at doing this. It's going to require a bit of practice. But if you know what to do and the pitfalls to avoid, you're bound to get better at this. And we'll also show you ways that you can go in without having to test fit, but you can evaluate whether or not that joint is going to work perfectly before you actually put it together. Obviously, we've got to start this conversation by talking about the instruments we're going to use. And what I have here are two chisels and my mallet. Now I'm going to start with the mallet. I prefer what most people would call a carver's mallet. Now the option to that would be more of a hammer style mallet. And I've got a friend that makes these and he does a beautiful job on them. However, the problem I find with a hammer style mallet is if you happen to hit it a little bit off center, it's going to glance off. I don't know what it is about this, but I find that I don't even have to be looking and I can always tap it and get it right on. By the way, this is made with maple, but it is a resin impregnated head. So in a vacuum chamber, they pull out the air, replace it with a resin. So when we turn these, they come out nice and heavy and hard, very durable. So you want a mallet that you're going to be comfortable with. And by the way, we tape the handles just to improve the grip. Now let's talk chisels. First thing you have to know is you have to have side clearance. So this is called a beveled edge chisel. That means the bevel is on the edge so that when you're getting in between two tails to clean out this area, you have to have enough clearance so that you don't bruise the side of the tail. And a lot of chisels actually put the bevel up on the top as opposed to on the side. Big problem. Not only do you want the bevel on the side, but if you allow that side bevel to go right to the back with a little bit of slope on there, this becomes a very sharp edge, almost such that you'll cut your hands with it. So you have a little bit of a flat landing. Not too much, but just enough so that it'll protect you when you're holding onto this, because usually when I'm chiseling, I'm holding down there very low, very close to the cutting edge. So that's the overall shape. Now, you'll notice that I have two that have different looking bevels. What I've discovered is if you're going to deal with pine, if you decrease your primary bevel, I actually take it down to 17 degrees, whereas a standard bench chisel is going to be anywhere from 25 to 30 degrees. What I discovered was dropping the primary bevel down to 17 degrees allowed me to go in and cut those very soft woods without crushing the fiber. Now, if you try to use that on hardwood, there just isn't enough metal out there to prevent that from breaking or bending. Whereas this is almost too blunt to use on softwoods. So that I use for things like pine, aspen, alder. This would be for all the other woods, including the exotics. Then we're going to go in and we're actually going to work on the pin portion of a joint, and I'll show you all the techniques involved there. When it comes to doing the pin portion, you always want to try to get this right so that you can assemble right from the saw. But occasionally you're going to make a mistake, so I'm going to try to do that now. And when I say make a mistake, I'll try to do this one right first. Correct means sawing and keeping it parallel to the line, stopping right at the baseline. Incorrect means we slope out a little bit. So I'll purposely do that. So if you look at that, you can see how I didn't stay parallel to my line, and we'll go in and correct that. Now I'll quickly go through and do these so that we have another socket to work on. All right, give me a second to get rid of this waste. Okay, before we start pointing out any particular errors, let's talk about posture. I always start chopping on the inside of the joint first. So when I say the inside, this is going to be the face. So when we assemble the two pieces, they're going to go together like that. The reason I do that, the first chop is going to go part way through. The second chop is going to finish the cut. So when you start the beginning, you've got resistance ahead of the chisel, preventing it from going all the way. When you do the second chop, at some point you're going to break through. You always run the slight risk that you're going to go through and damage this bottom side. Providing that happens, I'd rather have it on the inside of the joint than on the show side. So it may only be a 51-49 split, but I want it in my favor, so start on the inside, finish from the outside. So here we go. Always position the wood so that you can see plumb, meaning you want your chisel to be at least, if not perpendicular, slightly undercut, never sloping like this. If you chop this way, you have no way of being able to see that. So I always am in the habit of holding it like this. We'll do this one first. You'll notice there's not a lot of wood left on the waist side of the gauge line. Over here there is. So I made a bad cut with my fret saw. I got a lot of material. Here's the problem. The more material you have over here, the more pressure is applied to the bevel side of the chisel, pushing the chisel this way and possibly forcing it behind your gauge line. On the show side or on the face side, that would show as a divot. Looks really bad. So if I was starting up here, the first thing I would do with my chisel would be come in and I would take about half of that material, just one little chop is all it takes, just enough so that when I now lay my chisel right in the gauge line, it's going to get down in there a little bit before the pressure of that waist starts to build up. By now, I've got lots of material on this side preventing that chisel from moving. So I'm going to go about halfway. Now let me talk a little bit about the positioning. There's a couple of ways I do it, and I find that I change around once in a while. But I hold my right hand on the board, holding it in place. I never clamp it down. I just don't think it's necessary. I use my thumb as a guide. If you have a really good marking gauge line, the chisel will fall into that gauge line. And you want to know that it's there. Now, I'm holding this chisel by the handle, and I want to make sure that if I'm either plumb or slightly forward, meaning a very slight undercut. Anything in the opposite direction is going to leave a bump on the bottom of the socket and require a lot of extra work to fix. It will not allow the joint to close. So after a while, you'll get the hang of this, but in the beginning, try having a little square there just to show that you're slightly forward or undercutting a little bit. Now, you'll also notice that this socket is going to be more than 2 moves of this 1/2-inch chisel. So what I'm going to do is I went all the way over to that pin, and I'm going to go all the way over to this pin on the second cut. I'll show you why. About halfway. Now that leaves me just a little bit. If that little bit were left over here, what often happens, because you have to attack it with just the corner of the chisel, as you start pounding, the chisel wants to twist like this. And in doing so, you might end up digging in and going below your gauge line. Whereas if I can put that little bit of material right here in the middle of the chisel, then I have support on both sides, preventing that chisel from twisting, and it'll stay parallel to the gauge line. Okay? Now on this one, where I have very little material on the waist side, I don't have to worry about doing that preliminary chop. I'll just come along here, drag that across until I find that gauge line. Come over to the opposite edge. and then hit the middle. Okay, now you don't want any debris to be between the two pieces. It'll leave bruises. So sometimes I'll just go and break off some of that so it doesn't end up accidentally falling down there. I don't notice it, and the next thing you know, I've got big dents to deal with. Okay, another little tip here. You'll notice that the pin is sloped. If I can match the slope with my chisel, I can actually save myself some work. So again, holding it in the position so I can see plumb, I'm going to come right over to the pin, get my chisel in there so I can feel it engage. The first chop is going to be very light. I just want to register the chisel. Then I'm going to tip it forward. And what I'm attempting to do is find that same slope that's on the side of the pin. If I do it right, as I mentioned, I can completely eliminate one of the steps. Go slow as you make it all the way through so you don't end up breaking out the inside and damaging something. Come over here, move it over until you feel it engage. Make sure it's registered. First one's light, angle it slightly, chop through. Now this one, I can just catch it with, actually I can't quite. Yeah, I did. I didn't leave anything on there. Again, this one, too much, way too much material. Way too much. That'll put so much pressure, it'll push that bevel back, that chisel back. So I'm going to come in. I'm going to cut that by about 2/3. Just one quick little chop. All you're wanting to do here is just make it so that the first 32nd of an inch or so of penetration that the chisel does into the wood is not going to be hampered by pressure from the waste. Once you're down to 32nd, you now have enough supporting material over here that that chisel is not going to move on you. Little chop, angle it. Slow down as you get to the middle so you don't go blasting through the other side. And then again, hold it. There you go. Another technique is to hold down here and use your fingers to help guide that. I find that this one sometimes is more comfortable. Just use my thumb to move it over until it locks in there. But you have to have a really good marking gauge that will give you a nice severed line, not crushed fibers, so that when you're dragging that chisel across there, when it finds it, you'll actually hear it lock right in there. And there's no second guessing where it should be. It's in the spot. I always work from the face in. So this is the side you're going to see when the joint is assembled. Again, I'm going to be paring in these corners so I don't want to risk damaging out here. And if there's going to be any risk, I'm going to make it on the side that's going to be least visible. So now I got to hold the chisel in such a way that it's going to allow me to push this chisel through that difficult end grain without losing control, but allowing me to use lots of force. So what I'll do, because I'm right-handed, I squeeze the chisel firmly up here. I'm going to use my front of my index finger to anchor it against the face of the joint. Lots of pressure here, back pressure you'll call it. My right hand, my power hand, which is going to be right in line with my body so that I can actually push using my legs and the weight of my upper body to help push that chisel through the wood. By the way, this is a piece of northern white pine. It's very easy to chisel. And it's nice to start practicing with something like this because you can refine your technique without having to provide the extra muscle to get through the more difficult timbers. So we just want to get rid of any debris that's left in here, especially right in the corner. This is the stuff that tends to hide that's going to cause you a little bit of grief. So you want to come in here, use the corner of that chisel to make sure that that's nice and clean. And if there's a little bit left on the side, just finish that cut. Now, why I had to do that, my saw stopped right on the baseline. I did a slight undercut, so there's going to be a little bit of material left on the side of that pin to get rid of, and that's what I just did. Now we'll come over, and now here's a good example. You'll notice over here, I don't have any debris in there. Take that out of there, and that's pretty much good to go because I was able to slope that chisel and follow the side of that pin. Over here looks to be almost the same, maybe just a little bit. And don't worry about what's going on in here. That's end grain, so it doesn't count as an effective glue surface. As long as you're touching on the outside edges, it's going to be good. If you got a little bit of fiber failure in here, it's not a problem. Now we'll check this one as well. You would think you would turn this around and approach it from this side, but you can gain enough control by holding that chisel firmly that you can do everything you need to do without worrying about blowing a piece off that back. Now we'll just get rid of that. All right, so the bottom looks nice and clean. I don't think there's any bumps. I'm going to verify it by using this little 2-inch square, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to set it on that socket, and I should be able to move it side to side without feeling any bumps in the middle. If it rocks at all, then you know you've got a high spot. What's the problem with a high spot in the middle? Well, you close your joint, and the first thing that happens is it touches here first before it registers or closes out here, and now you have a gap. So you always want to make sure that if it isn't perfectly square across there, that it's slightly undercut. And the easiest way to do it, as I mentioned, is just to move your square back and forth, and you should be able to feel it registering on the outside edges, nothing touching in the middle. Same thing over here, so we don't have any issues. If we did, and this is a difficult procedure because it just adds so much work, what I typically would have students do is come in here and draw a little line right there and right here. Now what we're going to do with that line is we're not going to step outside of it. So if that was a little bit high, I would put my chisel right on there. Actually, let me do this correctly. I'd start on this side, put my chisel edge right on that line, angle it down, and head to the middle. Now the reason I turned it around, on this chop, I'm eventually going to break through, and there's nothing supporting the chisel tip, and if I blow something out, again, I'd rather have it on the inside than on the outside. Right on the line, and just go until you meet that area that you stopped chiseling from the other side. Get into the corner, and then verify it. Okay. Now our next move is to go in and check and make sure that this joint is going to go together the way we expect. That means that the sides of these pins we cut must be square to the bottom of the socket or plumb. And the easiest way to do it, and this is the reason why we use this little steel square, we've got a good reference surface on the bottom and we've got a solid patch right here. Setting the square on the bottom and keeping it there, slide it over. And when it gets to this side, it should touch up the face and across the end. And as long as it does, you know you're good to go. That one doesn't need any attention. However, over here, I can already tell that I've got some pen line left down here, so there's no way that that side was cut plumb. It is sloping towards the inside of the socket. So when I do this and move it over, what happens? Doesn't come close. Now the first thing I want to make sure is that I don't just have some debris down in here. So what I'll do before I start any major surgery, I'll come in and I'll just check the very bottom. Using the corner of the chisel, just go along there and get rid of any of that junk. Try it again. Keeping it flat on the bottom of the socket, move it over, and as you can tell, I'm far away from making a contact. If I were to ignore that and put the joint together, what you have to realize is the space between this wall and this wall at the top is greater than it is at the bottom. And since the top spacing came from the tail, meaning the tail is that wide, we're going to try to force it into a narrower spot, and something has to give. And most likely, it's going to take this half pin and push it over until you get a split right down there. Well, we certainly don't want that. Before I address this one, I'm going to note it. Let's come over and check this one. Remember, I actually have students that would come in here and they would lean it forward. No, don't do that. It has to stay seated on the bottom. Move it over. Now it's not making contact. Again, I'm going to go in and check to make sure that there isn't just some debris in there, and I think that may have been the problem. Come down from the top. I'm not pairing, I'm just finishing the cut, as I mentioned, I stopped at the baseline, but since I had that slightly undercut, there's going to be a little bit of material left right there at the bottom on the side of that pin. Check this one again. Yeah, that's good. I'm not going to mess with that. Let's try it on this side. Sometimes you need some light to see. Looks like there's some debris right there. There is, if you can see it. So we got to get rid of that. This is where you want really sharp chisels. And the primary reason is this. The sharper the chisel, or any tool for that matter, the less effort required to make it cut. The less effort required to make it cut, the more control you have. That's why it's always been said that the dull tool is the dangerous tool, because it requires so much extra effort, and that increased effort comes at the sacrifice of control. Try this again. Move it over nice and tight. Touching at the top, touching down the face. So we don't have to worry about that one. But this one's a problem. Now, there's a couple of things that we can do. The first one's the easiest one. We can pare down from the top. However, we always run the risk that the grain is going to be running in this direction. If it is, we start chiseling here, and the next thing you know, the fibers are going to start breaking out this way. If it goes the other way, not an issue. So here's how I do it. I'll start on the inside. Remember, we're going to see this. We're not going to see this in the assembled joint. So assuming that this dimension right up here is correct, I'm going to come within, just a 32nd or so of the top, and holding it what I think is plumb, I'm going to pare down. Now, if it pares nice and clean, then I know I'm safe to do it out here. If it tears back in here, I know I've got a problem, and I can't do it out here without risking tearing it off. That one actually came out nice and clean. So all I have to do is get this one correct, and then use that surface to come out here and continue it on that little strip out at the front. Now, I don't know if we've got it right yet. However, the fact that I still see ink on there tells me that we're probably going to have to remove some more material. Come in here with our little square and check, move it over, and we're not touching. So we still have a little more to take. So I'm going to do that same thing again. I'm going to come in the back, step just inside, pare straight down, and then use that as a guide and come in here. Get rid of any of that debris. Now you might be asking, what if we went the other way? What if we'd undercut? How do we fix it? We'll address that one in a minute. Let's deal with this one first. Move that over. We still have a gap. Now I'm going to look back here and see what's going on, and it's back here as well. So I still haven't pared down there with the chisel held plumb. I'm still a little bit to one side. So I'll come in and do it again. Don't start at the top. You don't want to mess with this shape up here. We're assuming that we transferred pins from the tails correctly, and this is optimum. So we're going to come in, so we're just down inside there a little bit. I'm pushing with my thumb, sliced off some more. If you want, you can come in here and reference off of that surface and use it just to finish that little strip in the front. I'm just using the corner of my chisel to go in there and sever that shaving to make it easier to remove. Make sure there's nothing left in that corner. Set that on there. Remember, don't tip it. Move it forward. That looks good at the front, but there's something going on here at the back. I'm hoping it's just some debris. So we'll go in here again and try it. This is a good reason why you should practice your sawing, because if you have to go back and start fixing half of your pins, you could have done another corner in the time it's going to take you to get this one corrected. There's still something there. The good news is it's only in the back. Okay, we're tight here, but when I hold that, I'm not quite closing in the back. The good news is the front part that shows is okay. This part that needs to be repaired isn't going to be seen anyway, so I don't have to worry about being quite as careful. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to do a little more paring in that back corner. Remove that waste. And try that again. Okay, so now we're touching up the front and across the top. Now that one's done. We're ready to assemble. Now, what if the grain had been running the wrong way and we couldn't do it? The other option is to come in and pare straight across, cutting across the grain. Now, it's a little trickier because you don't have the same level of, or they don't have the same support for the chisel. You almost have to start in mid-air. But I would come up here, assuming that this corner is correct, and giving myself a little something to hold on to or to support my chisel, come in and just tip that chisel down, picking up a shaving, and then going across. Now when you get here, if you want to avoid busting a piece off the back, you can just lift up and come down. Now we don't need to correct this one, but I'm going to go and do that again. And rarely are you going to get it right the first time. In fact, you almost don't want to. If there's a lot of material to remove, you're far better off to take a little bit 3 or 4 times, which gives you lots of control, than to try to go in and remove it all at once and risk wrecking something. So I'd come back in, take a little bit more, move across, and as you get toward the back side, just come up and then slide down. The whole time you're using the surface that you've cut to guide your chisel by laying that flat chisel in there, which, by the way, is another reason why you want the backs of your chisel to be as flat as you can possibly get them. That way you know that when you set the chisel in there, you know exactly when it's going to start to engage. If it's not flat, you're having to move it out until you finally find the point where the tip starts to cut the wood. Very frustrating. One final check would be to go in with your square and verify that all of those pin walls are standing plumb or square to the bottom of the socket. And now as long as you did your transfer correctly up here, that joint is going to work. Put glue on it, put it together the one time. You do not have to test fit. Every time you test fit, you risk bruising this, and the joint fits best that first time. But it's got to be right, and hopefully you can use these tips to verify it before you put that glue and drive it home. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. Now, I've always said, better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools that we actually manufacture right here, as well as our workshops, both in person and online. Good luck.